Good morning. So it's Friday, and I wanted to have like a general assessment of my week. There's still, like tomorrow, but I'm, like tomorrow I have like a lot of like small things to do. I have some assignments, from school. I have to finish my presentation for, like Monday, and I have to prepare like a slide presentation in PowerPoint, and also, like a Word document. And I'm kind of like making progress, but yesterday I ended up spending a whole lot of time in a section that then I learned that it was kind of outdated, so I'll have to go back and work on it later on. So I also will do this today, this afternoon. My mom and I will have some errands to run, so we'll probably so like we're probably going to take the whole afternoon, and then I'm going to class. So there's that. So it's going to be tomorrow and the day after, Sunday. But yeah, so this weekend I wanted to kind of like assess it in terms of like the things that I've done, the physical things, the things outside of my head, but also how I have like made progress, like internally. I've already had these videos this week talking about like things that I ended up developing, like thoughts that I've had. But I think that like every new thought is a contribution to like you ends up like getting you to be overall doing better. And I think that like every it's that thing of like leave no stone unturned. Is that the saying? Something like that. And I'm kind of like trying to be a little bit more proactive in terms of like these assessments, because sometimes like realizations, they just come to you. You're just existing, living your life normally, and then suddenly a realization comes. But sometimes like you have to instigate it a little bit, and that is something that like I think when I was younger, it was kind of I think I did that more often, thinking about myself at 18, 19. I was actively trying to instigate, change and improvements, for my part, like regarding my life. And there were a lot of things that were not going, right, because I wasn't 100% honest with myself. There was like a lot of like sidetracking, because sometimes I would step, it's kind of like it was this minefield, and I would step in the mine and things would blow up. So I had to kind of like pivot to a different direction because I wasn't really ready to talk about those things before. So yeah, I was constantly trying to instigate things, but as I said, it didn't always work out because I wasn't being fully honest with myself, and because there were like a lot of like issues that I had to kind of like address before I could get to this point where I could be fully honest with myself. Because even like right now, like there's still some things that I don't think I'm at 100% level of honesty, because it's kind of hard, because sometimes like you grow really attached to certain notions, and like to yourself, and to like the things that you're doing, and the way that you see yourself. So you create that vision, and you don't want to kind of like accept things that may kind of like contradict it. So there's that. And it's kind of hard for you to break down these images that you have of yourself. Like you kind of like get used to like that version, as I said, and you end up kind of like really embodying like that version. So it is also like when you try to break free, you're also breaking free from like your brain. Like you are still not still, but like you're also kind of like breaking free, not like with the past, but also the present. Even if like that is like bullshit, it's not really kind of like it's not the right situation, it still has a hold on you. And that hold, it's interesting because like you should study what that hold is, because usually like it is related to something, like some need that you have. So it can be the need for security, the need for like being liked, the need for acceptance, the need for stability, the need for certainty, and all those, they play a role. And it is one of those things that there's no right or wrong way to kind of like approach this, because there are different methods, and some are going to work for some people, and others they're going to work for other people, and not like the first ones. So you have to find out like what works for you. And sometimes like it is one of those things that like you have to rip up the band-aid, so you have to kind of like get rid of it right away. But sometimes it is more of you're kind of like you're scrubbing something out. So like every day you're kind of like you're improving like in those regards. But that being said, I have a lot of faith in myself, that even the things that today I can fully embrace as being the truth, that if I keep going, I will get to a point where I get to a point where like things turn out alright, because that is ultimately kind of like what we all want. We want to live happy lives, fulfilled lives, and like seeking the truth is part of that, and it's also kind of like key, because if you're living a lie, like most of you may kind of like come to kind of like accept that as the truth, and can be that, but like there's a part of you, there's always going to be like in tension. You're going to feel like this isn't real, and it is kind of like hard, as I said, sometimes to let go. But I think the key to kind of like to doing that is realizing why is that you tell yourself that lie. Why? Okay. Why is that you're so attached to that reality, to that life? And sometimes like your fantasies, they're very straightforward. Like I said, like you're looking for stability. The fantasy that you have is that you're stable. Like you look for security, fantasy, you're secure. Be it physically, financially, emotionally, and all the other ways. So there is a lot to be said about about like the lies that we tell ourselves. But anyways, I wanted to talk about this week, and I think I had like two interesting like developments. One, and I think I recorded both of them. Number one is the whole thing about protecting versus being protected, and also caring, because sometimes like there's not much that you can do to protect a person because like they're doing well, so like they don't need to be protected, but you still care for them. And protecting people is just a way for you to show that you care, to show that you love them, that they're important to you. So there's that. And then the other one was yesterday with the whole lowering of my standards. That was a really good one, because it kind of like ended up touching on a lot of like different things that I have been kind of like working on for the longest time. So it was interesting. It was an interesting development. And so like I had two kind of like interesting developments this week, and I think that they both kind of like contribute to like understanding myself that way. They kind of contribute to kind of like my overall improvement. So like I'll be kind of doing hold up I'll be kind of like doing nothing, and I can still grow. But yeah, so in terms of like if I compare myself today versus last week, like last Friday, I definitely think that I'm not really walking as much on eggshells. There are still some things, there's some sore points, there's some sore spots for me, but I do think that I'm doing better in terms of kind of like generally like not being too affected by like reality around me, specifically what has to do with politics and religion, because like these two, they're both that they get me kind of like, as I said, really like walking around as if I'm like in a minefield. For example, my mom was doing this course the other day, and she was kind of like doing it as we were going back home from college. She was doing it while I was at college, and I was at my class, and she was doing her course. And when we were at the car, for some reason that is very weird, but like they didn't allow like the volume to go all the way down. It was always at the very, at least like a minimum. And in the car, we kind of like listen to what was being said, and there were some points where I was basically like, oh, like where exactly is this going, and so I kind of like noticed that I was kind of like a little finicky about the whole thing. But in the end, like there was nothing bad that was said. It was just it was something about schools, like kind of like learning how to I don't know what the verb would be, but it's the same way that you have the word in Portuguese is capelania, which means like, for example, it can be like the one that you go to the hospital, the one that you go to prisons, the one that you go to schools. There are other types as well, and she was doing this one for schools. So they were talking about like teachers and all that. And yeah, so it was like a whole thing, and I was like, oh my god, where is this going? Because my head always goes to kind of like the worst case scenario. And I mean, like, it's understandable. I have had many bad experiences with religion, and so but that's the thing. I want to be free. I don't want to exist in this plane where I'm always kind of like like tiptoeing around things. I want to kind of like like I want to not care, basically. And that is, as I said, like that was, an example of like me not really being so free as I wanted to be. But in itself, I think that there was some type of improvement, in my condition. But yeah, but apart from that, like, I think that I've been hearing, conversations about politics, and I'm like just not gonna pay attention, not gonna see anything, not gonna hear anything, just gonna continue doing my thing, And although I will say that this moments can be kind of like productive, regarding, like my writing, because sometimes it can get me inspired to write, because, I am talking about these things in my novel. It is through the lenses of, a fantasy world, so there's that. But, still, like, these are things that we're discussing, and it is interesting because I'm trying to kind of like present a nuanced view. Like, our heroes, like, they're doing a lot of bad things, and, like, the villains, they are also doing bad things, but, like, I think that there's some aspects of their reasoning that can be kind of like, oh, it's not what I think, but, like, it is what, like, I can see how you got to that conclusion, which I think is actually really good for me in terms of like accepting people and, like dealing with dissent, because, this way I can kind of like, okay, let me look at, what this person is trying to accomplish, because sometimes, like if you humanize people a little bit, you get less angry at them, because you're like, okay, you're wrong. Naturally, like people defending certain things, like it is still bad, like there are consequences, to, like those situations. So I'm not saying that, you should just kind of like let go. It's important to fight, it's important to kind of like position yourself, it's important to, vote to your other civic duties and all that. But I know I don't want to kind of to live my life in anger and fear. I want to live my life happy and fulfilled. That is kind of like the goal right now, and I think that there is there is a chance. There's always a chance that, like things are going to get worse. There's always a chance that, things are going to go from worst to worst, and you have to kind of like steady yourself, because the only way that you can position yourself, to kind of like, kind of like against something, is if you can kind of like keep, like a steady head. I don't think that that's an expression, but you can keep your head on your shoulders, on your neck. I don't know, that is not the expression. Yeah, but like you get what I mean. You have to kind of like be, steady. Otherwise, you're going to kind of like spiral, and you're not going to help anyone if you're spiraling. So, you have to kind of like not necessarily overlook certain things, but you have to kind of like let them go. I think I have a tendency to kind of like attach myself to, certain pieces of information, certain, ideas, certain things that have been said or done to me, or that I have witnessed maybe, and I struggle to let go. This is not just, for regarding like this particular situation. It is also, like bigger than this, but, ultimately, like the outcome is the same. I want to kind of like to kind of like live a good, healthy, and, happy life, and but, not omitting myself from situations. I want to participate, but sometimes you have to take a step back, before you kind of like take a step forward. So that's kind of like where I think I am at. I'm at this point where, a lot of these situations, they are, how do you put it? Like, I have to kind of like, remove myself from the situation, and not only from like that specific situation, from the world in general. I have to go to a corner, a dark, quiet corner in the back of my head, where I can kind of like process things and let things go, because there's also like this cumulative effect. So, if I kind of like keep going, it is going to just, yeah, like it's going to be bad for me, because then, it's kind of like I have a glass, and the glass is getting filled, until like starts overpouring. So sometimes like you have to process things. So if something happens, you process it and you move on, you go to the next stage of your life, and then something else is going to happen and you process it and then you move on. Because if you don't process it, as I said, it's just going to accumulate and get to a point where it's starting to pour, and that is bad. That is really bad, because particularly for me, I'm bipolar, so usually when I get to this point where it is overpouring, like it is dangerous, like literally, like physically dangerous for me to kind of like continue existing, and as I said, I want to live my life. I want to live a happy, healthy life, you know, I want to be fulfilled. And so yeah, so like instead of like looking too much outside, I want you to be looking internally. You know, I want you to kind of like look inside and, you know, like see what are the things that add value to my life, and I'm gonna focus on those. But as I said, sometimes it's hard because I get attached too quickly to things, even like good things, bad things. Actually, like sometimes, you know, I could get more attached to good things. I wish that, you know, like I would get as attached as easily and as extensively attached to good things as I am to bad things. But that's just like, you know, human nature. That's kind of like how it happens to all of us. It's one of those things that I don't know, that there might be a solution, or maybe this is not one of those issues that requires a solution, because that is also something interesting. Like if you have this approach of like, what is the solution to this? There are some situations that there is no solution. It's that thing that people talk a lot about. Sometimes you just want a vent. You just want to say things. You don't really want a solution to be proposed. Because, you know, like, you know what the solution would be. It's just that it's easier said than done. You know, it's easier for you to kind of like realize that, oh, this is not working out so well. So how exactly do I yeah, like it's not working out so well. How do I make sure that this doesn't affect me permanently? Because that is the thing that really bothers me about my head and some of like the bad things, is that why does that linger for so long? You know, like why am I so attached to this? As I said, why is this, you know, stuck here? You know, I wanna keep on living, you know, and I am doing well in terms of that. I think compared to how I used to be, you know, I made a lot of progress, and that is pretty great, because that is, you know, one of the areas that for me is kind of like a leading area in which I can kind of I don't know what it's one of like the worst things, you know, for me is yeah, like it is these bad things that happen, because I get so stuck there that I forget everything else. You know, it really takes away my peace, which is something that I've been trying to protect, you know, like actively, because I think technically like I've always wanted to protect my peace. Not always, you know, I'm thinking about myself at 18, 19, 20. I was doing things that they were not really protecting my peace, you know, and that all that had to do with like me needing to feel strong. And, you know, in my head at the time, you know, I had to kind of like put up with horrible things, you know, like the horrible things being said and done for me to, you know, like feel like, oh, I'm strong because I'm seeing this is a direct attack, you know, at me, but like I'm kind of like just vibing. And that was really bad for my head, because as I said, like that really, that lingered, that stayed with me. Like those things to this day, I think sometimes my head goes back to those places, you know, sometimes. I think when, you know, it starts to accumulate, as I said, it gets to a point where like we go back to like those moments, and it's kind of crazy, because I mean, like a lot of things I have been able to let go, thankfully, like that, you know, really changed my life, being able to let go of some of those things, but it took time, you know, it took like years in some cases. It took a lot of therapy, a lot of like self-reflection, a lot of like self-actualization, you know. So it was something that it's also being a part of me. It's like one of the reasons why I don't want to hear certain things, I don't want to witness certain things, is because of that. It's because you know, like it's kind of like reminiscent, and it feels that if I kind of like see those things, I witness those things, it will be it'll be kind of like bad for I will kind of like go back to those patterns in which, you know, like this very self-destructive patterns, and that's not what I want for myself. You know, as I said many times before, I want to live a healthy, happy, and fulfilled life. Is important. Like the healthy, you know, I think that I have to highlight it a little bit more, because sometimes, you know, like I think there are more things that I can do to kind of like, you know, safeguard to keep, you know, myself healthy, because, you know, like there's mental health and there's physical health, and I think sometimes I can do better, you know, particularly like regarding like my physical health. Like there are things that I can do that I'm not doing, you know. So for example, exercising, eating well, drinking water, well, sleeping well, you know, having you know, having like hobbies, you know, and like investing time, putting time and effort into them. So like there are a lot of things that you can do. Although like the hobbies might be a mental health thing, but you can always do better. That's what I'm trying to say. You can always be healthier, and and it's important because I want to live a long life. So it is important for me to start establishing certain good habits, certain healthy habits right now, so that they become habits, and then I can kind of like keep on doing them till the day I die. I'm 28, so 28 and a half. Yesterday was, like I was, I turned 28 and 6 months, and which means that I'm 6 months away from 29, which means I'm a year and a half away from 30. And things change when you turn 30. That is, something that, like I'm not necessarily looking forward to. I'm looking forward to, like, because I'm improving. So I'm looking forward to, like, the version of myself that I will be at 30, which will be healthier, happier, and more fulfilled. But at the same time, like, your body starts taking some, things start to change. And I don't know if I want to see those changes. I mean, it's the thing about aging, is always going to happen whether I like it or not. But I did have a dream, yesterday or the day before, about me getting older. It was like kind of like a physical differences of me getting older, and I think it was very dramatic, very drastic, because it was just like a lot of like limitations for me. A lot of like mobility issues, a lot of like stuff, because I'm used, for example, to my face as it is. I don't have any wrinkles as it is, but like at a certain point, they're going to start coming. Although if I go by, because on both sides of my family, I have really good genes, like going on, like everybody, physically, like both like in terms of like appearance, but also physical mobility, physical appearance. Like everybody, thinking of my grandparents, particularly on my mom's side. I think I mentioned this yesterday or the day before. Lots of like like they're all very active, very independent. So I have like that to look forward to, and so it's kind of like reassuring, for me to kind of like realize that it's okay, it's okay. I'm gonna get older, but that doesn't mean that like all those limitations that we usually associate with age are gonna come. Also, I'm gonna turn 30. My grandparents, they're in their 80s, so it's like 50 years before I get to that point. But it is interesting because sometimes I hear my grandma talking about how, like a decade prior, there were things that she would do. She's still very active. She's constantly traveling. She does her own stuff. She has to kind of like do something. She takes the bus and goes downtown and solves it. So she's very active. I want to be like her when I get to her age. But eventually she kind of like, okay, when I was my 70s, there were things that I could do that they're no longer the case. For example, I traveled with my mom and my grandma last year. We went to Rio, and so they could get their visas renewed, their visas to the US. I don't need a visa because I have an Italian citizenship. But yeah, so they wanted to get their visa, and it was a really fun trip. I really enjoyed it, and it's one of those trips that really linger with me to this day. I still remember like some moment from what we had. So it was a very nice trip, and it's interesting because like the day before we were traveling, I wasn't very excited, but it was a good thing that I went, and I think we enjoyed ourselves. It was pretty good. But what I'm trying to say is that what I wanted to say is that there were some situations where we had to kind of like leave my grandma resting. So for example, we went to a mall, and it's definitely like not the biggest mall in the world, but it is the biggest mall that I've ever been to. And it's kind of like interesting because some malls, like, they are built with like the structure of what they are, but some of them, like, they're built in a certain way, and then people start to add like onto it. It reminds me of some malls that we have here. But the point is that we left her sitting some points at some points, so we would go and explore. And that is something that I'm like, okay, there's going to be a point where I won't be able to go and look at things and explore as much. But as I said, like, that is 50 years from now. So I can rest assured from now. But yeah, so basically the assessment that I had this week, I had some interesting realizations, some developments, and I can definitely say that today I am dealing better with some of these issues than I was last Friday. So that is, and maybe like the difference is not super drastic, but it is also, but it doesn't have to be. Like, growth is this continuous thing. So if I can kind of like see like 1 degree, 1 level of improvement over my week, like, that is good enough. you know, because if I have like a little degree, like a 1 degree of improvement per week, like in a month, it's 4 degrees of improvement, in a year, 52 degrees of improvement. So that works out. Because sometimes, like, you get anxious, about, the future. So like, okay, I want to get to the point where I am, hold on. I want to get to the point where I've improved and these things no longer bother me. But yeah, but I will say that I'm really happy with the development, because one of like the biggest things that has stabilized me in the past not only in the past decade, since I think that it has become bigger in the past 5 years, but it has always been an issue, because the thing is that sometimes politics is a type of thing that people want to kind of like group it together and like make it smaller, saying so like this is political, this is political. I don't know if this is how, I think this is how things have always been, but we live in this times where like so many things, so many social issues, so many economic issues, so many sovereignty issues, like there's so many of these issues that they kind of like involve, things are very politicized, that's what I'm trying to say. So a lot of like these issues that they might not necessarily have to do with politics, or that shouldn't have to do with politics, they do, like they're kind of like involved there. So like the scope of things that can kind of like harm me is like very extensive, because like there's just so many things that fall under that of politics. Religion too is also kind of like encompassed in the whole politics thing. So like there are so many. So I think what I'm trying to do in a certain way, I'm trying to separate things, because sometimes some ideas they come together. So some politicians, they're going to defend like there's going to be this broad stroke of like, so this is what the left wants, this is what the right wants, like that type of thing, and they're going to kind of like hide under like these umbrellas. So you kind of like assume that they defend certain things because of like that's kind of like how these things work out, when in fact you can see people on both sides of the aisle that will have some averse notions. So they're not going to defend like every single thing here, and same way that they're not going to defend every single thing here. So yeah, so I'm trying to kind of, I guess, like dissociate from separate these things, so that they yeah, like, so I'm trying to kind of like separate things a little bit, because and also this has been an interesting exercise, because it makes me realize that there's some things that I don't oppose too much. Like the issue I have is because they come as a package deal, so then you have like this thing plus all these other things, it's kind of like a bundle, one of those streaming bundles. That's kind of like how it works. So I kind of like realize there's some things that they don't really matter to me. It's not, that's harsh, not that they don't matter, but like I'm not as opposed to them as I'm to some other things, but unfortunately, as I said, like they do come together, so there's no way for you to kind of like separate them, because that's kind of like some of the platforms that people run on, so they're not going to change. But I will say that it has been very therapeutic for me to just go through some of those things and be like, I don't necessarily oppose this, or kind of like I oppose this, but it's not like that, the fierce opposition that I have regarding some other issues, So it's been kind of like disarming. So, the minefield, it's kind of like I'm disarming some of the mines, because, like that is also like the issue, because this one thing connects to like a different thing. So, it starts, for example, religion is a good example. There are so many different religions out there, and there's so many variations of each religion. There's so many things that people, they defend or they don't defend. Like what I remember from this is that I have an aunt, one of my dad's sisters, and I always thought that if she were to kind of like listen she were trying to like figure out, this was like back in the day, right now I no longer have this idea, but when I was like 18, 19, I was like, oh, if she kind of like hears about my sexual orientation, she's going to be kind of like affected, some way or another. But then a couple of years later, I heard she was not talking about me, she was talking about my brother, my older brother, and I was like, oh my gosh, she was basically saying that regarding like sexuality, there are some things that she kind of like opposes because like religion mandates it, but like she doesn't really have any issues, which I know is like, it's not particularly a great take for you to have, but it did make me like, oh, okay, so she would not have issues with me and my sexuality. So it was kind of like a very groundbreaking moment for me, because I was like, I had this image of who she was, and that was like not her, that was like that was yeah, like that. So that's interesting, but like that's basically kind of like what I'm trying to say, is that sometimes people, they will defend these bundles, or sometimes they're not even going to defend the whole thing. They're just going to position themselves in a way that you kind of like assume that they have like these positionings, but when you break down what they have to say, like they don't really necessarily defend all the things. So that's kind of like where I've been finding solace of some sort. I've been kind of like looking at the situations, and I'm like, oh, like this is yeah, like this is not as bad as I thought it was. Naturally, even if a person doesn't really believe in what they're saying, they're still defending it, because that's the thing about politicians. They say a lot of things, and like there are a lot of them that I'm like, I don't think you really believe all that, but you have a base, so you're kind of like saying these things to build your base. But like, does it really matter that you don't really think this, because the harm is real? Like you are kind of like profiting from this. So that is kind of like an interesting thing, and it's interesting because like this particular notion, it kind of like sets this thing in my brain where basically I start trying to find ways, how can I profit from this thing that brings me pain, the thing that causes me discomfort. And I have no reach, so there's not much that I can do, but I do think about this sometimes, like maybe I should go out there and pretend to be a certain politician kind of like trying to defend something, because then I would at least gain something from the situation. I think this is an interesting mindset to have, but it is like it's some of those things that I'm like, I'm kind of like betraying myself and whatever in the causes that I defend. But sometimes like you just feel so defeated. I feel like that there's no other way. But I never really do anything. But my head does wander, just go to that place of like, what can I do? And it's kind of crazy because sometimes I think politics, like, okay, maybe I should try to become a politician, and like trying to kind of like defend that. But that's something that I talked to my therapist before. Like, I don't think I'll be able to defend that. Like it's something that I'm thinking, but like in practice, I don't think that would work out for me, because I don't think I'll be able to kind of like wholeheartedly defend things that I'm against, particularly when those things are harmful. Because there are some things that, as I said, that they are not, like they're kind of whatever, like regardless of like what we're doing, like it doesn't concern me. Although you could argue that I'm saying this from a privileged position, which would be true, because those things, they don't affect me, and I'm kind of like we're all selfish in our own ways, but it's usually moments like this that I really see my selfishness, because basically I'm kind of like sacrificing the things that make sense to me, so I could get comfort, and I'm doing harmful things, so I can like have some that's the thing, it's not even peace of mind, because my mind wouldn't be peaceful. It's just like kind of like me trying to find a loophole in the system, as that will lead to me kind of like I don't know, like no longer not being so hurt. But like this is, I'm pretty sure this is a very fallacious notion, because I don't think that like I would be happy like that. So it's one of those things that I'm just trying to. It's kind of like, is that what people say? Like there's a dam and then there's a hole, and try to stop it with your hands. Like that is not doing anything, but it is something. Sometimes like you feel like there's nothing you can do, so when you do come to an idea of something that you can do, like you kind of like get attached to it. It's like, okay, well, let me just do this, like let me focus on this. But anything that you're gonna do, it takes time and effort. So I end up getting back to the point of like, if it's going to take time and effort, I might as well do something that adds to my life. So for example, writing, like, so if I'm gonna spend the time and effort creating this fantasy in my head, creating this reality, in which I'm kind of like somehow benefiting from this, I might as well write. This water has a weird taste. I don't know if it's the bottle or it's the water, but it was, but like it's regular water that I got from another thing. So anyways, but yeah, so basically I found that this week I was able to kind of like grow, and even if it's just a little bit, like that is that's good enough. That's all I need for me to grow. So yeah, so I think the word that I'm looking for this week is resilience. I've been talking a lot about it lately, maybe not the past couple of weeks, but some months ago, like I was talking a lot about it, because that's ultimately what I want to develop. I want to be able to withstand the bad moments, like the bad things that are happening, and not in a way that I'm like, I don't want to be numb to them. Like, that's not what I want. I want to be fully present, but I want to be able to process them, those situations, in a healthy way, in a way that doesn't really adds up to, doesn't, there's no, accumulation of that. I want to, yeah, like I want to process things as they come, and that is kind of, like the case. Uh, but yeah, so that's kind of it for today. This was a good week. Hopefully, like next week is going to be better than today, than this week. And I kind of like want to go back into like a good pace, because regarding my novel, I am at a point. I am in this version that I'm going through. I'm kind of like closing, connecting the dots, closing the gaps, and I'm kind of, sometimes like because even if I do one chapter per day, like that is going to take forever. So I would like to do more than one chapter per day, but sometimes I struggle. So I want to kind of like to do better. There are strategies that I can have. I don't know what they are, but I kind of want to. I want to optimize the process. Like that's definitely something I can do. I don't know what it is, but I wanna try and work on it, because I am trying to, it's because if I start skipping, it's going to be a mess, because then I'm not going to be closing in on like the chapters. Also, I kind of like have, because like this particular this draft I'm going through. I'm kind of like just closing the gaps, as I said. So I'm not really, I'm improving things, but like this is going to be the next, like review, the next revision, next draft. So that's kind of that. So anyways, bye.